All right, good morning, Grove family. How are you? Everybody in the room doing well? I want to say good morning to our friends that are watching online. And what we want to say to you is we are jealous because we have to wear pants to church. So those of you at home enjoying a good bagel, we're glad you're here with us watching online as well. It is incredible to get to be with you this morning. My wife and I have fallen in love with the Grove in this community. And to those of you in this room and those that are watching online, thank you for the gift of your time this morning. I am well aware that we're in the midst of one of the busiest times of year. Right now, we're juggling yard work and kids' ball games. We're stepping into all the year-end kind of stuff with awards nights and proms and upcoming graduations. And so that you made the time to come here means so much. So thank you, and thank you to those of you that are also watching online. You know, my wife Tara and I, we recently have been doing a lot of reflecting on all this year-end school stuff. Partly because of the season of life we're currently in. We have two boys who are 18 and 16. And so we're in that odd season where our oldest is going to graduate from high school in a few weeks and go off to college. Both our boys are driving now, God help us. They both work jobs. And so we're starting to do a lot of reflecting and thinking about a lot of things we're going to miss here soon when they're no longer under our roof. We're also reflecting about some things that we won't miss when they're no longer under our roof. One of those things being an ongoing crisis we find ourselves navigating that could really be summed up in two words: food shortage. These guys literally are eating us out of the house. And so my wife and I, weeks ago, we kind of took matters into our own hands. I don't know if I should be proud of this or not, but here's what we did. We started hiding food in our bedroom from them. The nightstand right by our bed, if you right now went and opened the cabinet, it is loaded with this awesome stash of like little brownie bites and those individual bags of Sun Chips just for us. And so every now and then at night, the boys will see us kind of get giddy and excited, skipping down the hall, holding hands. We'll race into our bedroom and slam the door and lock it. They're on the outside going, ew, what's going on in there? Little do they know, we're hiding under the covers, popping brownies like aspirin. So good, so good. You get close to 50 and life gets a little pathetic. I'm just saying. No, but I love our boys and I love being a dad. Man, I cherish it. I always wanted to be a father. And ever since my boys were little, I've really taken seriously about weekly creating margin to have time with each of them one-on-one, to have experiences and to connect with them. And we always called it around our house, Dad and Dude time. Dad and Dude time was where we just hung out and connected. And this morning while we're hanging out, we're going to peek in on another guy and his son who were having some dad and dude time. The dad is a guy by the name of Abraham. Maybe you've heard of him. He's kind of a Hall of Faith guy in the Old Testament. And he's hanging out with his son Isaac, and they're having some dad and dude time. And I remember the first time I ever was exposed to Abraham. I was a young kid sitting in the lobby of a dentist office. I don't know if you remember these or not, but when you used to go to the doctor's office or the dentist, do you remember these? The Bible story, right? Had that big label on there, display copy, don't take, right? Like, don't you dare take this and read the Bible. Very welcoming, right? But I remember sitting there waiting to go, and I was kind of nervous, and I couldn't quite read very well yet, but I loved looking at the pictures. And so I started kind of fanning through this book. And right a couple pages in was this picture of this dad and his son walking by this stream together. And I thought to myself, that's nice. I love my dad. This guy and his son are spending time together. Turn the page. Oh, that's sweet. Reminds me of my father. And then I turned the page and things got a little odd. Something was missing. I looked down and the boy is now tied up, laying on this, looked like a table. And the dad is standing over him with a knife going. And I'm like, that dad's got an anger problem, right? I mean, I thought my dad was kind of rough when he would yell, Chad, Brandon, Cadell, get down here now and bring me something to spank you with. And I'd bring like a pillow, or a stuffed animal. But I'm like, this guy, what is going on? And as a child, I did not understand this event. And I can tell you as an adult, for me still, I think this Abraham-Isaac encounter is still one of the most disturbing, most incongruent events in the Bible. Now, if you're here and you've never read the Bible and you're like, who's Abraham? I'm thrilled you're here. And so let me give you just a snapshot so you're kind of caught up with who this Abraham guy is. Little background. At one point, God gave Abraham a special promise. And it wasn't just any ordinary promise. The Bible calls it a covenant. And a covenant was like a promise on steroids. And this promise assured Abraham that one day he would become the father of many nations. One day he would have countless descendants, and eventually those descendants would have what is called a promised land. And he was given all these incredible promises and was told that they would come through the gift of a son. One small problem, Abraham didn't have a son. And so one day he's talking to God and he's like, God, listen, this is amazing. This is awesome. All this means so much to me. One little thing, I don't have a son. And so if you fast forward just a little bit in the book of Genesis, eventually you'll read that Abraham and his wife Sarah became pregnant with a boy that would be named Isaac. And Isaac's name literally means laughter, because when God told them they were going to have a baby, the Bible said they laughed. And you and I should be laughing too, because when they had the baby, Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90. So we should be laughing with them. This is crazy. Like, this is the couple that you see on the commercial, where they have the two bathtubs and the couple's like holding hands, laying in their own tub, looking out over the sunset. This shouldn't be happening, right? This is the couple that should be cruising through Costco with their friends, shopping for Depends, not Pampers. But they're having a baby. And so Isaac is born. In spite of everyone's laughter and disbelief, God's promise was born. Isaac was on the scene. He was the dream child, the one that God had promised. And you read to this point and go, what an amazing story. What a miracle. And then this is where the story takes kind of a dark turn. What I would call kind of a Dateline NBC kind of turn. Things get a little twisted and bizarre when God all of a sudden makes this uncanny request to Abraham. He asks him to sacrifice his son as an offering. Now, we know that back then during those times, a sacrificial offering was the norm, but it was usually done with an animal, not a young child. And so Abraham's got to be thinking, oh, God, wait a second. I must have misheard what you were saying. Can you say that again? I mean, God, listen, a while back you asked for that circumcision thing to prove I was yours. I went along with it, even though I would have preferred a secret handshake. I did it. And now this? You want my child as an offering? What? And, the Bible doesn't really tell us much about Isaac as far as how old he was at the time. But we know that he wasn't a baby. He was old enough to carry wood on his back. He was old enough to ask some pretty intelligent questions. But why in the world would a good God ask Abraham, a father, to do something that to us seems so bizarre, so twisted? Let's pick up in Genesis 22:1 together. It says, sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. And I want to pause there for a moment and ask you to kind of mentally just circle that word tested and think about it for a moment. This test was not really for God's sake, it was for Abraham's sake. Have you ever thought that maybe when you're in the midst of your own tight spot, that God could be testing your faith? Not for his benefit, but for yours. As you fan through the pages of the Bible clearly affirms time and time again that God sometimes uses tests. Sometimes he allows things in our life for one purpose, and that's to build our faith muscle. And we don't always like that. I know I don't. Like you, I wish our tight spots had easy answers. I wish Bill Clark could do a whole summer preaching series here called Easy Answers for Your Tight Spots at the Grove. But you and I know those don't really exist, right? Those tight spots, they're pretty dark. And when we're in those tight spots, they tend to manifest themselves in very troubling, very lonely kind of ways, don't they? And my guess is right now, wherever you're sitting in this room, wherever you're watching online or on the replay, every single one of us right now is watching and listening in the midst of probably a current tight spot. You know what that is. It's that thing that you seem like you pray the same prayer over and over and over again about. God, fix this. God, change this. God, would you heal this? Hey, God, come on. Could you please remove this? And there's a variety of tight spots. There's many represented in this room and online this morning. Some of you are right now trying to navigate a financial tight spot. Seems like there's always more bill than there is money at the end of the month. It's tight. For some of you, it's a relational tight spot. There's a relationship in your life that is maybe toxic or that's gone sour. For some of us, maybe it's a job you go to every day that you just can't stand. It's a tight spot because it just oozes conflict, and it takes everything you have to go there another day. Some of you know what it is to navigate the tight spot of a wayward child, when you feel like you've done everything right, and they just keep drifting further and further and further away, and you're convinced they're never coming back. Some of you are single, and you're in this tight spot where you're beginning to think, am I going to be alone forever? Some of you are in the tight spot of caring for aging parents. If you've ever been there, you know that you at times feel very unprepared for that, very overwhelmed and weary. And then some of you are navigating right now the tight spot of just trying to climb out of this ditch of this pandemic season. And man, it's been a tight spot. But I ask you right now, what is your tight spot? And I want you to kind of get that in the forefront of your mind as we're spending time together. You know what it is. It's that thing that consumes your thoughts. In no time, it sucks up all of your physical and emotional reserves. But I want to tell you this morning, there is good news for our tight spots. And that is this: in my 50 years of life, every time I've asked someone, where in your life have you grown the most on your spiritual journey? You know what they say? Probably 9 times out of 10, they always point back to their tight spot. They'll say, Chad, you know what? When God really built my faith muscle was when we were in the midst of this. He did something in me. Chad, you know what? You know when God really grew me and made me kind of spiritually buff was when we were navigating all of that, man. Wow, he did something. And so with that truth in mind, I want us to look at this bizarre encounter with Abraham and Isaac, honestly with some excitement this morning. With him as we learn from him how not only to survive the tight spots, but how we can thrive in the midst of the tight spots, how we can actually press on during the tight spots. How many of you here or online have ever watched an episode of the show Survivor? Probably so. There's like 84 seasons of it. It's been on since like 1977. Jeff Probst, the host, is about 120 years old. He's older than Abraham, and still around, looks good for his age. But, unlike the popular television show, Abraham wasn't working with a team to earn a prize. He was working all alone. And he was just trying to survive to keep his prize. And so while we hang out here as a family and as friends just for a few moments, I want us to just kind of pull up a chair alongside this encounter together and see what we can learn about navigating our own tight spots. What's that look like? How can we thrive? And how can we press on? And one of the first things we learn from Abraham is this, and that is, in the tight spot, I must live with confidence. I must live with confidence. Confidence is the result of someone's life where they're living their life by faith. And as you watch these people, here's what they do. They, instead of denying the tight spot, instead of running from the tight spot, instead of pouring out all this sideways energy, just griping time and time again about the tight spot, they show up to the tight spot. They face it. They take it on with this uncanny confidence. And what that confidence is faith in action. That's what it is. And I want us to look at this confidence, that kind of confidence Abraham had with God's very unusual request, beginning in verse 2. Abraham, God called, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Now let's pause there for a moment. I want to ask you this question. When you read that, when you hear that, don't you immediately go, what kind of God is this? Is this a God we just worshiped a few moments ago? This doesn't line up. Or you might say, God, not fair. God, not fair. You ever said that? I have. Not fair. What kind of God is this to ask a dad to give up his one and only son? And for me this week, I've tried to really personalize this message, and it's been easy to do because I have two sons of my own. My wife and I, for about 8 years, we navigated that roller coaster ride of infertility treatments and not being able to have children. We wanted kids more than anything. It was physically and emotionally expensive. We then navigated a couple failed adoptions, and we were just about ready to throw in the towel. And then God gave us these guys, Casey and Cameron. These are our boys. And I love them with every fiber of my being. I love their sense of humor. I love that they have their mom's spiritual gift of sarcasm. And they're my everything. And when I try to imagine God saying, hey, Chad, give me Casey. Or God saying, Chad, I need you to let go of Cameron for good. I need to have him. I want to think that I'm a pretty spiritual person, that I really love Jesus. But my response would be, no. God, I love you, but I don't think so, no. And I would find myself probably kind of bartering with God, like, God, could we work something out? Like, what about my mother-in-law's cat? I hate cats. But you don't have to be a parent to feel the intensity of this. You can see this is a very dark place in Abraham's life, no question. It was in this moment that Abraham became like the poster child for tight spots, right here, right now. He's having to give up what he loved the most in the world. And you know, Isaac was more than just his precious boy. Isaac was the fulfillment of a promise. He was the hope for the future. And so let's keep looking at this confidence Abraham had as we go to verse 3. It says, the next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and he took one of his servants with him along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering, and he set out for the place that God had told him about. Now, you might read that and go, Chad, where's the confidence in that? I'll tell you where it is. It's in 3 words. He got up. He got up. First of all, it tells us he went to bed after that request and had a pretty good night's sleep. I don't know about you, but if God had made that request to me, I would have been up all night pacing the floors, pounding coffee, throwing Tums down my throat, biting my nails, sweating bullets. I wouldn't be able to even lay down. And then it says when he got up, instead of giving God a list of excuses why this just isn't a really good day for this, I got a lot on my calendar, he went. He went. And you know, the Bible doesn't really let us get into the mind of Abraham and what he was thinking. But one thing I think he's navigating is, how do I bring my wife into this? Like, how do you start that conversation? Do you even tell her, hey, sweetheart, just going to let you know about our plans for the day. Isaac and I were going to blow out here in a few moments and grab some Waffle House together, and we're going to go to the park and shoot some hoops. And on the way home, I'm going to take his life. I'll be back about 6. How do you even approach that conversation? But it says he went. How in the world is a dad who loved his kid, how do you even get up and go? Why? The only thing I can think of is because Abraham had a confidence in who his God was in the midst of his tight spot. He knew exactly who he was, and so he went. Abraham, for so many years, had looked to God for so long that over time, he developed a new perspective, a different kind of lens, a perspective that totally superseded even his love for his only child. And so in the midst of this terribly horrible spot, this tight spot that is dark and that is painful and that is very lonely, Abraham had a perspective that God will provide. Pick up with me in verse 6. It says, so Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, the boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? You see what's happening here? Isaac's not dumb. He's starting to connect the dots. He's like, okay, Dad, I've got the wood, you've got the knife and the fire. Where's the sacrifice? He's starting to get a little concerned. Abraham isn't rattled. Very calmly in verse 8, he says, God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. And they both walked on together. Would you right now in your mind underline 3 very difficult words there? God will provide. Those are big words. Like, don't forget those today. Like, if you got to go home and shave them in the side of your dog, whatever you got to do to remember that. God will provide. And I just want to make this personal. Right now, in the midst of the tight spot you're sitting in this very moment as you listen to this, in this room or online, in the midst of your tight spot, do you have that confidence that God's going to provide? Do you believe that God will provide? That God's really got this, even if he doesn't change it, even if he doesn't fix it, even if he doesn't heal it or remove it? Do you really believe that he's able? Do you have the confidence that God will make a way when there seems to be no way whatsoever? If we're going to follow Abraham's lead in the tight spots and survive, but also thrive and press on, we got to live with confidence, and then we must look for direction. We must look for direction. And I really believe that this is what separates those who are growing in their spiritual journey from those who aren't. These people, they don't only look for God's direction, they follow it. Pick up here with me in verse 4. It says, on the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and he saw the place in the distance. That to me, this is pretty wild. Scripture tells us that this journey for Abraham and Isaac, it was 3 days. 3 days that Abraham was following God's direction. And the Bible never says once about him even beginning to turn back. Can you imagine for 72 hours the torment in Abraham's mind and heart? Knowing that every step he took, every step he continued to take was one step closer to his final destination of Moriah, which would be the end of his Isaac. Let's just be honest. Sometimes God's direction, it doesn't make any sense. You can be spiritual and say that and admit that. It doesn't. Not on this side of eternity. And I've got to believe that Abraham on this 3-day journey, man, he had to have some doubts along the way. He doubted. He had to. And yeah, we celebrate in the Bible, he's this hall of faith kind of guy, but I'm convinced he wasn't a doubt-free guy. Because if you look in other places of the Bible, you see some holes in his faith. You see some holes in his journey. Earlier in his life, the Bible says he laughed in disbelief when God said, Abraham, you and Sarah are going to be parents. Right? He's like, that's a good one, God. What show am I on, man? I've been punked, right? Like, no, he laughed in disbelief. You flip over a few pages and it said there was a time where he totally lied and told people that his wife was his sister just to protect his own life. Oh, and then there was that time where he slept with his wife's servant so he could be guaranteed a child at any cost. I got to think this guy maybe had some doubts along the way. Abraham's an ordinary guy like us. And like us, man, there's probably a lot of things he got wrong, but I'm going to tell you one thing that he got right, and that is he kept going. He kept going in the midst of the tight spot. Abraham had this tenacious kind of obedience. I'd call it a long obedience in the same direction. He followed God's direction in spite of the questions, in spite of the doubts. Now, I want to kind of go after your heart a little bit this morning and tell you something that I observe often in people I do life with and in my own life, to be honest. A lot of times I'll hear people say, I just want God's blessing. I want God's blessing on my family. I want God's blessing on my health and my time. I want God's blessing on my finances and on my relationships. God bless this and God bless that. But I think a lot of times we crave his blessing, but we're not really interested in his direction. And I'm a poster child for that at times. I would say it this way on the screen. Everyone wants the results, but very few people want the road. We crave God's blessing, don't we? But we're not always super interested in his direction, because that might be very, very tough. What I'm suggesting this morning is a survivor in the tight spot like Abraham. Man, even when it's tough, they follow his direction, even when it doesn't make a lick of sense. I heard a story a while back about This couple had been married over 50 years. One night they're lying in bed. They have their nightly routine. He's doing his crossword puzzle. She's reading her magazine. And a few minutes into it, she puts her magazine down. She says, "Hey, honey, do you remember when we were young? Do you remember back to that time and you used to always hold my hand?" And he's like, "Oh," and he kind of grumbles and puts his crossword down and grabs her hand just to appease her. He thinks it's all done and they can move on. And a few minutes later, she says, "Sweetheart, do you remember when we were young and we used to snuggle?" He's like, "For crying out loud." And he shifts in the bed and he goes up next to her with a big sigh. And he's like, "Oh, we're missing Jeopardy," right? A few minutes later, she says, "Sweetheart, do you remember when we were young and you used to nibble on my ear?" And at that moment, he throws back the covers. He storms out of the room into the bathroom. And she says, "Sweetheart, what's wrong? What did I say? Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to get my teeth." You see, here's the deal. To nibble on an ear when you're young and when romance fills the air is one thing. To nibble on an ear when it is packed with crazy ear hair and reeks of the scent of Bengay is a whole other story. Staying the course, following his lead, even when it's tough, even when it doesn't make any sense. I'm really convinced that's one of the keys to our spiritual growth. It's that long obedience in the same direction. That long obedience in the same direction. Now you say, "Chad, how do I get guidance or direction in those kind of situations when I'm in the tight spots?" Well, what you do is you go home this afternoon, you throw out a question on Facebook, and then read all the comments. Don't do that. No, you know what you do? You set the course of your life on God's word, the Bible. Look what Psalm 119 says about the Bible. It says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet. It is a light for my path." You see, the Bible was never meant to be a coffee table decoration we set out when company comes over. Oh, the Bible. It was never meant to be something that people just argue and debate over. You know what it is? It's Google Maps for this life. I have no sense of direction at all. The first time I came to Hickory Grove, if I didn't have maps, I would have been knocking on the door of the Ark in Williamstown. "Hey, is Bill Clark here?" Right? What, giraffe, right? It got me there. It is Google Maps for this life, but it gives you way more than a street address. And I'm telling you, if you don't have one, find us after church. We will get you one with a translation you can actually understand. We'll give you apps and tools that help you actually open it, read it, understand, apply it. Who knew we could do that and not be puzzled? We would love to get that in your hands. But it is Google Maps for this life. And I'm going to love you enough this morning to say to you in person and online, if you're not reading it, you're going to be totally lost without it. You're going to live this life lost, misinformed, kind of guessing at life, just kind of chasing at the wind and running out of gas. If we're going to, like Abraham, survive the tight spots, if we're going to thrive and press on, we're going to live with confidence. We've got to not only look for God's direction, but commit to follow it. And then lastly, I've got to labor to focus. I must labor to focus. You and I know that focus in any element of life can be very difficult. When I was a kid, I'm convinced that I had ADD. People just tried to beat it out of me. And as I got older, I've kind of learned to manage it, but I struggle to focus still as an adult. Like, you would not want me being the lead surgeon on one of your operations. It would sound something like this. I'd be gathered with the team and saying, "Team, I'm now cutting into the abdominal cavity. I think I have a cavity. My tooth is killing me. My uncle is a dentist. Did I tell you my cousin's a vegetarian? I love asparagus. Why am I holding a liver?" Right? Like, that's how it would go. It can be so difficult to focus, and yet Scripture's teaching us it is key on our spiritual journey. And Abraham's focus, man, it's such a model for us, isn't it? Pick up with me in verse 9. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and he arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. Don't miss what this scene has taking place here. Like, this is huge. This is more than just some story. Like, picture this with me. Like, here we have Isaac. He is tied up. His father is standing over him with a knife. He's got to be crying and begging and pleading. This will be a hard scene to watch. Dad, don't do this. Dad, what's wrong with you? What did I do to you? You're my father. God, stop. You imagine the noise and the weeping and the angst that's going on, and yet Abraham is locked in. He is locked in, and he is not allowing Isaac to distract his obedience in any way. He is locked in and focused. And you know, the temptation to stop at any moment must have been incredible for him as a father. Here he is holding his own child and dropping him on the altar. This same child he's seeing as he's looking through the reel of his life, looking back at when he first held him when he came out of his mother's womb. He's looking back at the highlights, the same child he used to hold in his lap and read books to when he was little. This very same child he held and comforted when he was crying and had taken a fall. That very same child he is now laying down to sacrifice. How in the world could he do this? I don't know. I don't know how he could remain so focused. The only thing I know is this, is that Abraham was focused on God and not on Isaac. That's all I know. I would say it this way. This is what we learn from this, and that is it's not about what you're facing. It's about where you're looking. It's not about what you're facing or what is all up in your face right now. It's about where you're looking. And Abraham, in the midst of his son, screams and cries and begging his dad to stop. He stayed locked in and focused and obedient because he was looking at God and not at his Isaac. Let me ask you right now, and our friends online, in your tight spot right now, what are you focusing on? What are you focusing on? Right now in your tight spot, where are you looking? Are you looking at God? Are you looking at Isaac? They say, Chad, how do we do that? The only way I think we do that is we begin to subscribe to what I would call loose grip living, where we commit to begin to kind of hold everything in our life with a very loose grip. Those things we try to hold on to and control and fix, we loosen the grip and we let them fall to the altar. And then we take our hands that are now freed up and we grab onto God with everything we have. And we hold on for dear might. That's what Abraham did. Abraham chose a life of loose grip living. And what happened? Here he is with the knife over his son. Verse 11, it says, at that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You've not withheld from me even your son, your only son. And then Abraham looked up, and he saw a ram caught by its thorns in a thicket. So he took the ram and he sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Wow. And wow. Church, look at me. God honors and blesses faithfulness. God honors and blesses obedience. And on this journey, we can't help but see the incredible and the obvious relationship between the Old Testament and Abraham and the New Testament and Jesus. I mean, think about Isaac and Jesus and the correlation there. Both submitted to their fathers. Both carried their own wood on their backs. And both walked to a place of sacrifice. And God sacrificed his own son to have a personal relationship with you. With you. And with you. And this morning, he longs for you to say yes to him. And you know what? He longs for you to loosen the grip on the steering wheel of your life. To loosen the grip on your tight spot. to surrender it to him, to turn over the keys to him and let him drive. To turn over the keys and say, God, I'm done. I'm going to go ride shotgun over here. And God's saying, thanks, get out of my seat. Turn over the keys. I'll close with this. When I was a kid, I went to elementary school right over here at Hinsdale Elementary in Edgewood. And one of the guys I loved at our school was our custodian, Mr. Wally. And every morning when you came to school, I love this guy because he always had a big smile. He had a high five for you. And he had this massive key ring. And you could hear him from miles away. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. The big old key ring banging up against that old pair of Wranglers he'd wear every day. And I was always just mesmerized by this plethora of keys he had. It was fascinating to me that this one guy in our school could get into any room, any door, any closet, any cabinet. And if he didn't have a key to it, that was a bad thing because he couldn't change it or fix it. And you know, sometimes I look at our life as kind of like a giant key ring. And on that key ring, there's the key of our marriage. There's the key of our health. There's the key of our family and relationships. The key of our money, the key of our time. And I sometimes wonder if we don't maybe take one of those keys and kind of tuck it in the corner pocket of our heart and say, God, I'd rather you not mess with this part. I'm going to kind of keep this one for myself. I'd rather you not interfere with this. And I just ask you this morning, is there an area of your life where God's kind of locked out? Maybe it's your tight spot. Because here's the deal. Jesus is like Mr. Wally. He can't fix what he can't get to. He can't fix what you won't begin to give him access to. And on the screen, I think this is how Jesus would say it to us this morning. I think he would say, I can't be Lord of all if I don't have it all. I can't be Lord of all if I don't have it all. And I'm going to ask you right now, if you would just bow your heads at home in this room. And here's what I'm going to ask you. This is a time where we tend to flip the switch and turn off. We go, okay, they're going to sing the song. You're mentally kind of already at Frisch's, out mowing the yard, and kind of checked out. Don't do that today. Would you not do that? Would you right now for a few more minutes be fully present in this moment? And would you allow the seat you're sitting in or wherever you're sitting at home, let that become holy ground for a moment in the presence of God? Let this become your personal altar. As Tim and the band begin to play, I'm going to just walk us through some questions where we can just really be honest with God, because this is the point of the service where we go, am I going to do anything with this? Because God's not into us checking boxes. He's into changing lives. Let's not check another box this morning. Let's not just go through the motions. Let's grow through the motions today, church. So I ask you, as you sit here in the presence of a God who's crazy about you right now, what or who is your Isaac? What or who is your tight spot? And do you maybe right now need to take that key to that tight spot and lay it on the altar and say, God, here, VIP access, come drive. Surrender it to him. Or maybe you've got a key that actually is the key to your heart, a heart where Christ does not live yet. Isn't it crazy that you can attend church for years, be there when the doors are open, attend every service, serve in ministries, pray, take communion, give, do all the church calisthenic stuff and still be lost as ever? I'm convinced that there's some people this morning who really know church but don't know Jesus. And this morning, maybe you need to surrender that key and say, Jesus, I've missed this. Come into my heart right now. Make my heart your home. I invite you to come in and make this your crib. Make this your apartment. Come in here and clean up things. Rearrange the furniture how you see fit. Pull off a fixer-upper and flip this thing in your name and in your power. But you got to give him the keys. Today, say, come into my life. In 2 weeks from today, over in this field, be baptized and celebrate that decision. It's going to be a party. Can't wait. Here's the deal. Whether you've been in church for 45 minutes, or for 45 years, what I know is this, and that is that every single one of us listening right now has a next step to take. And on the screen, you can just text next step to that number. And we'd love to come alongside of you and encourage you on the steps and give you resources and pray for you. Let somebody know about what that is. But as we worship, and as you sit there in holy ground with your own altar this morning, let's lay some keys on the altar and let him drive as we worship.